He waited outside the abandoned police station for 41 nights before anyone realized he was mourning someone. Every evening, just after sunset, when the last gold light faded behind the pine-covered hills of Ashton Ridge, the German Shepherd appeared from the fog, carrying the same object gently between his teeth. A scratched silver badge stained dark around the edges. He would place it carefully on the cracked concrete steps beneath the station door, sit beside it without moving, and stare into the empty building as if expecting someone to walk back out. The town called him Ghost Dog. Some said he belonged to a dead cop. Others claimed he came from the woods beyond Miller Lake, where old patrol roads disappeared into miles of cold forest and silence. But nobody really knew. By the 6th week, people stopped trying to chase him away. The dog never growled, never barked, never begged for food. He only waited. Rain soaked his sable coat night after night until the thick fur along his back clung dark and heavy against his ribs. The scent of wet cedar and rust drifted through the mountain town, while wind rattled the broken station windows like distant whispers. Most people avoided the place after dark. It reminded them of things they preferred buried, especially the disappearance of Deputy Aaron Hayes 8 years earlier. No body, no answers, just a badge number quietly retired and a wife who moved away before winter came. At 6:13 p.m. on a bitter November evening, Nathan Hale noticed the dog for the first time. Nathan parked his faded Ford pickup across from the old station while sleet tapped softly against the windshield. He had only been back in Ashton Ridge for 3 weeks, though back never felt like the right word anymore. Afghanistan had taken too much from him. His wife Claire had died the year before from a long illness he still couldn't bring himself to talk about. And since then, silence had become the only thing he trusted. At 40 years old, Nathan still carried the frame of a Marine. Broad shoulders, close-cut brown hair touched with gray near the temples. A face weathered by desert heat and sleepless nights. But grief had hollowed him in places no uniform could hide. He noticed the dog because it wasn't moving. The shepherd sat perfectly still beneath the flickering station light, while freezing rain collected along the edges of his pointed ears. Between his paws rested the silver badge. Nathan narrowed his eyes. Something about the animal's posture stirred an old memory buried deep beneath years of combat and loss. Discipline, vigilance, loyalty, the kind trained into military working dogs until it became instinct stronger than fear itself. As Nathan stepped out of the truck, the cold mountain air hit hard against his lungs. Gravel crunched beneath his boots. The dog immediately lifted his head. Amber eyes locked onto Nathan with startling intensity. Not aggressive, not afraid. Watching, studying. The way soldiers study unfamiliar terrain. Nathan stopped halfway across the street. For a long moment, neither moved. Wind drifted through the empty road, carrying the faint scent of pine needles, rainwater, and something older beneath it all. The shepherd slowly lowered his head again and nudged the badge forward across the wet concrete. Nathan's heartbeat slowed, because engraved beneath the dirt and scratches, barely visible under the station light, was a name he recognized. Aaron Hayes. Nathan stared at the badge while freezing rain slid from the brim of his dark canvas jacket and dripped onto the pavement below. Aaron Hayes. Badge number 2471. The metal looked older than it should have, scratched deep around the edges as though it had spent years buried somewhere forgotten. The German shepherd remained seated beside it, chest rising slowly beneath his soaked sable fur, amber eyes fixed on Nathan with an unsettling calm. Somewhere down the empty street, a church bell echoed through the cold evening air. Nathan crouched carefully, boots scraping against wet concrete. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. The dog did not move. Up close, Nathan could see faint silver around the shepherd's muzzle and a scar cutting through the fur near his right shoulder. Not fresh. Old working dog scars. The kind earned through years of service and survival. Nathan reached slowly toward the badge, but the instant his fingers brushed the metal, the dog placed one large paw gently over it. Not aggressive. Protective. Nathan exhaled softly through his nose. "All right," he murmured. "You are guarding it." The shepherd lowered his head slightly, rainwater dripping from his ears. For reasons Nathan could not explain, the gesture tightened something deep inside his chest. He had seen military dogs do the same beside fallen Marines overseas, refusing to leave gear behind even after the helicopters disappeared into smoke and dust. Loyalty stronger than training, stronger than fear. Nathan straightened slowly and glanced toward the abandoned station windows. Most of the glass had been boarded years ago after budget cuts forced the county to move operations closer to the interstate. But one upstairs pane remained uncovered, dark and reflecting the pale glow of the street lamp outside. The place smelled like mildew, wet wood, and old paper left too long in forgotten rooms. Ashton Ridge had always buried its pain quietly. 8 years earlier, Deputy Aaron Hayes vanished during a late-night patrol near Miller Lake. The official report called it an unexplained disappearance. Some people whispered he ran away. Others claimed drugs or gambling debts. But Nathan remembered Aaron differently. Honest, quiet, the kind of man who still held doors open for strangers and checked on elderly neighbors during snowstorms. Nathan had only spoken to him a handful of times before leaving for deployment, but he remembered Aaron's dog, a young German Shepherd K9 named Valor. The realization settled into Nathan slowly, like cold water rising around his boots. His eyes drifted back toward the animal beside the badge. Older now, leaner, weathered by years outside. But the posture matched, the alert ears, the disciplined stillness. Valor, Nathan whispered. The dog's ears twitched instantly. Then for the first time all evening, the shepherd stood. The movement was slow but deliberate, paws silent against the rain-darkened concrete. Nathan felt his pulse quicken. Valor stepped closer until only a foot separated them. Close enough for Nathan to smell damp fur, pine sap, and faint traces of lake water tangled deep within the dog's coat. Valor stared directly into Nathan's eyes, searching him with the same quiet intensity soldiers used before trusting each other with their lives. Then the shepherd gently nudged the badge toward Nathan's boots and turned his head toward the distant tree line beyond town, toward Miller Lake. Wind moved through the pines with a low, hollow whisper. Nathan looked into the darkness stretching beyond the road, and for reasons he could not fully explain, he felt certain of one thing. The dog had not been waiting at that station for sympathy. He had been waiting for someone willing to follow him. The road to Miller Lake curved through miles of dark pine forest where fog drifted low across the asphalt like pale smoke. Valor moved ahead of Nathan's truck without hesitation, appearing and disappearing between the trees whenever the headlights swept through the rain. Every few minutes the shepherd stopped just long enough to look back, making certain Nathan was still following. The deeper they drove into the mountains, the quieter the world became. No traffic, no cabin lights, only the soft hum of tires against wet pavement and the distant rustling of wind through branches heavy with November rain. Nathan tightened both hands around the steering wheel as old memories crept quietly into his mind. Afghanistan had sounded different at night. Sand instead of rain, helicopters instead of owls. But loneliness always sounded the same. Heavy, endless. He glanced again at the silver badge resting on the passenger seat beside him. Aaron Hayes. 8 years missing. 8 years without answers. Yet somehow his dog was still searching. Nathan had seen men lose hope after 8 days. Sometimes after 8 hours. But not this animal. Valor carried grief the way Marines carried duty. Without complaint. Without permission to quit. Nearly 20 miles outside town, the shepherd veered suddenly off the road onto an overgrown service trail half hidden behind fallen branches. Nathan slowed the truck carefully. Mud splashed beneath the tires as the narrow path descended toward the lake. Tall pines crowded both sides of the trail, their trunks black against the storm-dark sky. The scent of wet earth and cedar filled the cab through a crack in the window. Somewhere ahead, water moved softly against rocks. Miller Lake. Nathan remembered fishing there once as a teenager before deployments and funerals, and life had turned everything simpler into something distant. Valor stopped near an old ranger gate hanging crooked on rusted hinges. The shepherd stood perfectly still beneath the rain, ears raised toward the woods beyond the trail. Nathan killed the engine. Silence settled instantly around them except for the ticking of cooling metal and the whisper of rainfall through pine needles. "What is it, boy?" Nathan asked softly as he stepped from the truck. Valor did not bark. Instead, he walked slowly toward the trees, stopping every few yards to make certain Nathan followed. The beam from Nathan's flashlight cut through fog and drifting rain while mud clung thick beneath his boots. Broken branches littered the ground. Old tire tracks, nearly erased by time, curved toward the shoreline before vanishing beneath weeds and moss. Then Nathan saw it. Hidden between two massive cedar trees sat a small cabin nearly swallowed by the forest itself. The windows were boarded. The roof sagged beneath years of storms. One porch light hung crooked above the entrance, swaying gently in the wind though no electricity remained connected. Valor climbed the porch steps slowly and sat before the door, waiting. Nathan's pulse quickened. The cabin smelled abandoned even from outside. Rotting wood, damp fabric, rust. Yet beneath it lingered another scent faint enough most people would miss it entirely. Smoke. Not fresh, but recent enough to matter. Nathan swept the flashlight across the porch floor. Muddy boot prints marked the boards near the doorway, newer than the rain. His jaw tightened instantly. Someone else had been here. Valor lowered his head and released a quiet sound deep in his throat, not fear, but warning. Nathan looked toward the black forest surrounding the cabin, every instinct sharpened by years of military training. Then slowly, almost carefully, Valor placed one paw against the old cabin door as though trying to tell him something inside had been waiting a very long time to be found. Nathan rested one hand near the flashlight clipped to his belt while the other pushed slowly against the cabin door. The old wood groaned softly beneath the pressure before opening inward a few inches. Cold air drifted out carrying the smell of dust, damp blankets, and extinguished firewood. Valor remained motionless behind him, ears raised high toward the darkness inside. Rain tapped steadily against the cabin roof, while somewhere deeper in the forest a branch cracked beneath the wind. Nathan widened the door carefully and swept the flashlight beam across the room. A small table stood near a stone fireplace coated in gray ash. Shelves lined the walls holding rusted cans, broken lanterns, and stacks of newspapers yellowed by time. In one corner sat an old radio covered by a canvas tarp. Nothing looked lived in, yet nothing felt abandoned either. It felt paused, as though someone had walked out expecting to return before nightfall and never did. Nathan stepped inside slowly. Floorboards creaked beneath his boots. Water dripped from his jacket onto the dusty wood floor while the flashlight beam moved across faded photographs scattered beside the fireplace. He crouched and picked one up carefully. The image showed a younger Aaron Hayes smiling beside a patrol truck with one arm around a German shepherd puppy barely large enough to reach his knee. Valor. Nathan looked back toward the doorway where the older dog still waited silently in the rain. 8 years. 8 years, and the animal had never stopped carrying his partner home. A heaviness settled in Nathan's chest that felt painfully familiar. He remembered another dog years ago overseas. A black Labrador named Mercy who searched collapsed buildings for survivors after explosions. Mercy once waited 3 straight days beside the empty cot of a fallen handler until another Marine finally carried her outside. Nathan had learned then that dogs did not understand death the way humans did. They understood absence, and absence could last forever. Valor finally stepped into the cabin, paused silent against the wood floor. He moved directly toward the fireplace and lowered his nose close to the stones. Nathan followed carefully. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then the flashlight caught fresh scrape marks near the base of the hearth. Recent. Someone had moved the stones recently. Nathan knelt beside the fireplace, fingers brushing against cold mortar and loose dust. Valor released a low rumble deep in his chest, not threatening but urgent. "You have been trying to show this to someone, have you not?" Nathan whispered. The shepherd stared at him without blinking. Rain continued drumming softly overhead while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the mountains. Nathan gripped one loose stone carefully and pulled. It shifted easier than expected. Behind it rested a narrow metal box sealed tight against moisture and age. Nathan's heartbeat slowed. The box was military-grade, old but durable, the kind used to protect important documents in harsh environments. He set it carefully onto the floorboards and wiped years of grime from the lid. Etched into the metal were 2 faded initials. A. H. Valor stepped closer immediately, pressing his nose gently against the box before sitting beside it with quiet discipline. Nathan hesitated for several seconds before opening the latches. Inside rested a small cassette recorder wrapped in cloth, several photographs, and a folded sheriff department file stained dark around the edges from water damage. Nathan picked up the recorder first. His thumb hovered over the play button while cold wind whispered through cracks in the cabin walls. Then suddenly Valor's ears snapped toward the forest outside. The shepherd stood instantly, body tense. Nathan froze. Through the storm came the faint crunch of footsteps moving slowly through wet leaves beyond the cabin porch. Nathan killed the flashlight instantly, and the cabin fell into darkness except for brief flashes of pale lightning bleeding through the cracks in the walls. Valor stood near the doorway, muscles rigid beneath his rain-soaked coat, head low and ears locked toward the woods outside. The footsteps stopped. Silence followed, the kind of silence that pressed against the chest and made every breath feel louder than it should. Nathan remained crouched beside the metal box, one hand resting lightly on the cassette recorder while rain whispered steadily across the roof overhead. Years in the Marines had taught him something simple about fear. Most danger announced itself loudly. Real danger moved quietly. Another faint crunch echoed outside near the porch steps. Then nothing again. Valor released a slow breath through his nose, but did not relax. Nathan waited nearly 30 seconds before finally moving toward the nearest window. He lifted the flashlight carefully and angled the beam through a narrow gap between the boards covering the glass. At first, he saw only rain drifting sideways through the trees. Then a shape moved briefly beyond the porch. Tall, human, gone almost instantly behind the pines. Nathan's jaw tightened. Someone had followed them to the cabin. Valor stepped closer to Nathan's side without making a sound. The shepherd's amber eyes remained fixed on the forest with absolute focus, every instinct sharpened by years of training. Nathan gently rested a hand against the dog's neck. "Easy boy," he whispered. Valor did not look away from the trees. Thunder rolled low over Miller Lake while cold wind pushed rain through cracks in the cabin walls. Nathan knew they could not stay long. Whoever had been outside knew this place existed. And if someone was still watching the cabin after 8 years, then whatever Aaron Hayes had hidden inside that metal box still mattered to somebody. Nathan glanced down toward the cassette recorder in his hand. The plastic casing looked worn from age, but intact. He moved back toward the fireplace and pressed the play button carefully. Static crackled through the tiny speaker first. Then a man's tired voice emerged beneath the hiss. Aaron Hayes, older than Nathan remembered, slower, frightened in a way honest men rarely allowed themselves to sound. "If anybody finds this recording," Aaron said quietly, "it means I ran out of time." Nathan felt the air leave his lungs slowly. Valor lowered himself beside the recorder the instant Aaron's voice filled the room. The shepherd's ears twitched forward, and for the first time since Nathan met him, the dog released a soft whine deep in his throat. Recognition. Aaron continued speaking through layers of static and rain interference. "There are people inside the department involved in moving girls across state lines through the old logging routes near Miller Lake. I tried taking it to internal affairs, but somebody warned them before I could." Nathan's expression hardened instantly. The room suddenly felt colder. Aaron paused on the recording, breathing unevenly before continuing. "I copied names, license plates, payment records. Everything is hidden with this tape. If something happens to me, do not trust Sheriff Dunley." Valor slowly placed one paw against Nathan's boot as though grounding himself in the sound of his partner's voice. Nathan swallowed hard. Sheriff Marcus Dunley still ran Ashton Ridge County. Respected, untouchable, the kind of man people called dependable during election years and funerals. Nathan stared into the darkness near the cabin windows while Aaron's voice crackled softly through the recorder. "If Valor ever brings someone here," Aaron whispered near the end of the tape, "then maybe God finally sent somebody who still believes loyalty matters." The recording clicked off abruptly. Silence returned to the cabin except for rainfall and the faint hum of wind through pine branches. Nathan looked down at the German shepherd beside him. Valor stared back with tired amber eyes carrying 8 years of waiting inside them. Then somewhere beyond the cabin, an engine started in the darkness near the road. Nathan extinguished the cassette recorder immediately and slipped it back into the metal box while the sound of the distant engine rumbled somewhere beyond the trees near the service road. Valor rose beside him at once, shoulders tense beneath his soaked sable coat. The German shepherd moved toward the cabin doorway but stopped short of stepping outside, waiting for Nathan the same way trained military dogs waited for commands before entering dangerous ground. Rain continued falling in steady sheets across the forest, turning the night into a blur of shadow and silver mist. Nathan crossed the cabin quickly and peered through the narrow crack beside the boarded window. Two pale headlights glowed faintly through the pines below the hill, half hidden behind drifting fog. The vehicle was parked near the ranger gate where Nathan had left his truck. Whoever arrived had killed their lights, but left the engine running. Nathan's instincts sharpened instantly. Nobody came this far into Miller Lake during a storm unless they already knew exactly where they were going. He looked down toward Valor. "We are leaving," he whispered. Valor's ears twitched once in understanding. Nathan gathered the photographs, the cassette recorder, and the folded files from the metal box before wrapping them tightly inside the canvas cloth. The names Aaron mentioned on the recording echoed heavily in his mind. Human trafficking, corruption, Sheriff Dunley. It sounded impossible, and yet Nathan had seen enough darkness in the world to know evil rarely looked dramatic. Most of the time it wore polished boots and shook hands at town parades. Another car door slammed somewhere outside. Closer now. Valor released a low warning growl from deep in his chest. Nathan moved toward the back of the cabin where an old storage door leaned crooked against the wall. He shoved it carefully open and cold air rushed inside, carrying the sharp scent of pine needles and lake water. "Lead the way, boy," Nathan murmured softly. Valor slipped into the darkness immediately, silent as smoke moving between the trees. Nathan followed close behind, boots sinking into wet earth while rain soaked through his jacket collar. The forest behind the cabin dropped steeply toward the shoreline, tangled with thick underbrush and fallen cedar limbs slick with moss. Lightning flashed overhead for a brief second, illuminating the lake below like cracked silver stretching through the mountains. Then darkness swallowed everything again. Behind them came the faint sound of the cabin door opening. Nathan froze beside a massive pine trunk while Valor crouched low several yards ahead. Voices drifted faintly through the rain, but the storm carried away most of the words. Nathan caught only fragments. Someone was here. Search the area. His pulse slowed into the calm rhythm old Marines learned during danger. Fear wasted energy. Focus kept people alive. Valor looked back toward Nathan and held still, waiting. The shepherd trusted him completely now. Not because Nathan had earned it, because Aaron had trusted him first. The realization settled heavily in Nathan's chest as they moved deeper through the woods. A dog had spent 8 years carrying grief through storms, winters, hunger, and loneliness because loyalty told him his partner still deserved justice. Nathan wondered how many human beings would have done the same. Rain dripped steadily from pine branches overhead while mud clung thick around his boots. Nearly half a mile from the cabin, Valor suddenly stopped near the shoreline beside an overturned fishing boat rotting beneath weeds. Nathan crouched beside him. Hidden beneath the boat rested a small waterproof duffel bag sealed carefully in plastic. Nathan stared at it in silence for several seconds before slowly unzipping the top. Inside were dozens of photographs, old financial ledgers, and a sheriff department flash drive wrapped inside another evidence bag. Aaron Hayes had not been collecting rumors. He had been building a case. Then Valor gently rested his head against Nathan's shoulder for the first time all night, and Nathan realized the dog was trembling. Valor trembled quietly against Nathan's shoulder while rainwater rolled from the shepherd's fur in thin streams onto the muddy shoreline below. Nathan slowly rested one hand along the dog's neck, feeling the rapid heartbeat beneath the soaked sable coat. It was not fear. Not entirely. It felt older than that. Exhaustion carried too long. 8 years of carrying memories no animal should have been left alone to guard. Thunder echoed softly across Miller Lake while cold winds swept through the trees, bending tall pines toward the dark water. Nathan unzipped the duffel bag further and pulled out the first stack of photographs. Even in the weak beam of the flashlight, he could immediately see why Aaron Hayes had hidden them. Several showed sheriff department vehicles parked near remote logging roads deep in the mountains. Others captured license plates beside abandoned storage buildings near the county line. Dates were written carefully along the corners in black marker. Names too. Nathan's expression hardened as he turned another page. Sheriff Marcus Dunley appeared in one photograph shaking hands with a man Nathan recognized from local campaign posters years earlier. Councilman Richard Vance, Ashton Ridge's wealthiest land developer. Nathan remembered hearing stories after returning home that Vance donated heavily to police charities and veterans groups. Smiling photographs in newspapers, ribbon cuttings, scholarships. Yet Aaron had hidden these images like evidence from a war zone. Valor suddenly lifted his head toward the trees. Nathan killed the flashlight instantly. Voices drifted faintly through the storm somewhere uphill near the cabin trail. Closer than before. Flashlight beams swept briefly between the pines like pale ghosts searching the darkness. Nathan lowered himself beside the overturned fishing boat while Valor crouched silently at his side. The shepherd never barked, never panicked. He simply watched, waiting for Nathan's next move the same way he must have once waited for Aaron. Nathan realized then that the dog had probably repeated this routine for years. Returning to the station, returning to the cabin, guarding the evidence, hoping someone honest would finally listen. The thought hollowed something deep inside him. "You carried this all alone," Nathan whispered softly. Valor looked toward him for only a second before returning his attention to the woods. Somewhere beyond the shoreline, a branch snapped beneath heavy boots. Nathan carefully pulled the flash drive from the evidence bag and slipped it into his jacket pocket while rewrapping the remaining documents inside the duffel. He needed someone outside Ashton Ridge law enforcement. Someone impossible for Dunley to silence quietly. Then suddenly a memory surfaced in Nathan's mind. Rebecca Torres, former Marine Corps investigative journalist. Tough, relentless. One of the few people Nathan still trusted after the war. She now worked for a Denver newspaper specializing in corruption cases involving local governments. Nathan had not spoken to her in nearly 2 years, but he still remembered her number. A cold gust swept rain across the shoreline while the distant searchlights moved farther through the forest uphill. Valor slowly rose and nudged Nathan's arm with his nose. Not toward the woods this time, toward the lake itself. Nathan frowned slightly before following the direction of the dog's stare. Nearly 50 yards down the shoreline, half hidden beneath reeds and fallen branches, sat an old aluminum patrol boat tied loosely to a rotting dock. Nathan narrowed his eyes. Fresh mud covered one side of the hull despite the storm washing over it all night. Somebody had used the boat recently. Valor stepped closer to the edge of the water and released a quiet sound deep in his throat. Nathan understood immediately. Aaron had hidden multiple escape routes. The cabin, the evidence, the lake access. He had known people inside the department were hunting him before he vanished. Nathan rose carefully, gripping the duffel bag tighter beneath his jacket. Rain dripped steadily from his hair into his eyes, while the forest behind them remained alive with distant movement. Then Valor suddenly turned back toward the dark woods and growled low for the first time since Nathan met him. Not warning. Recognition. Valor's growl deepened as he stared into the darkness beyond the shoreline, every muscle in his body drawn tight beneath the rain. Nathan slowly turned toward the trees, pulse steady but alert. For several seconds, he saw nothing except fog drifting between the pines. Then a figure stepped partially into view beneath the weak glow of a flashlight uphill. An older man wearing a dark sheriff department raincoat. Sheriff Marcus Dunley himself. Even from a distance, Nathan recognized the heavy shoulders and square posture that had appeared in county newspapers for years beside smiling deputies and parade banners. Dunley swept the flashlight slowly across the woods before lowering it toward the shoreline. Valor's ears flattened instantly. Nathan understood at once. The dog knew him, not as a friend, as something dangerous. "Easy," Nathan whispered softly while resting one hand near Valor's neck. The shepherd remained still, but the low rumble in his chest never faded. Dunley stood motionless near the tree line for several moments while rain dripped steadily from the brim of his hat. He looked older than Nathan remembered, gray around the jaw, slower in the shoulders. But there was nothing tired in his eyes. Even from 50 yards away, Nathan could feel the weight of a man used to controlling every room he entered. Then Dunley spoke into the darkness with surprising calm. "Nathan Hale," he called out. "I know you are out there." Nathan's expression tightened. Valor shifted protectively closer beside him. "You should not be involved in this," Dunley continued. "Aaron made mistakes. I would hate to see another veteran dragged into something ugly." Nathan remained silent beneath the overturned boat while cold rain slid down the back of his jacket. The sheriff's voice carried strangely through the storm. Smooth. Controlled. Like a man who had rehearsed his excuses for years. "That dog does not understand what happened," Dunley said. "He has been wandering these woods ever since Aaron disappeared. Loyal animal. Broken mind." Valor's growl sharpened instantly at the sound of Aaron's name. Nathan gently tightened his grip against the shepherd's collar to keep him still. Somewhere behind Dunley, another flashlight beam drifted through the trees. He had not come alone. Nathan studied the shoreline quickly. The patrol boat rested only yards away. If they could reach the water quietly, the fog across Miller Lake might hide them long enough to escape. Then Dunley spoke again, softer this time. Aaron should have let things go. Silence followed those words. Heavy silence. The kind that revealed more than shouting ever could. Nathan felt something cold settle inside his chest. Not fear. Certainty. Aaron Hayes had not vanished accidentally. Valor slowly lowered himself beside Nathan, eyes never leaving the sheriff uphill. Rainwater dripped from the shepherd's muzzle, while distant thunder rolled across the mountains. Nathan leaned closer toward the dog and whispered, "You stayed because nobody else would." Valor glanced toward him briefly. In that moment, Nathan saw something painfully human in the animal's tired amber eyes. Not vengeance. Grief. A soul trapped between loyalty and loss for nearly a decade. Nathan carefully removed his phone from his pocket beneath the shelter of his jacket and typed one message with cold fingers. Rebecca Torres. Need secure contact immediately. Corruption case. Human trafficking evidence. If anything happens to me, send federal authorities to Miller Lake Cabin. He pressed send. Weak signal bars flickered once in the corner of the screen before disappearing again. Nathan exhaled slowly. It was enough. At least someone else now knew. Up near the tree line, Sheriff Dunley lowered his flashlight and stared into the darkness surrounding the lake. "You can still walk away from this, Nathan," he called quietly. "Some truths destroy everybody who touches them." Nathan looked toward the old patrol boat rocking gently against the dock while fog rolled low across the black water. Then he looked down at Valor. The dog had spent 8 years refusing to walk away. Nathan was not about to fail him now. Slowly, carefully, he tightened his grip on the duffel bag and nodded once toward the lake. Valor rose immediately beside him without hesitation, ready to follow wherever the next step led. The patrol boat drifted softly against the rotten dock while fog spread across Miller Lake like a living thing swallowing the shoreline inch by inch. Nathan moved first, crouched low beside Valor as they slipped silently through the reeds toward the water. Behind them, Sheriff Dunley's flashlight beam swept slowly across the trees, pale and patient. The man was not rushing anymore. That frightened Nathan more than anger would have. Calm men usually believed they were still in control. Rain continued falling in thin silver lines across the lake while cold wind pushed ripples against the aluminum hull of the old patrol boat. Valor climbed aboard first with careful balance despite his exhaustion, amber eyes fixed on the shoreline behind them. Nathan followed quietly and untied the rope securing the boat to the dock. The old motor would make too much noise. Instead, he reached for the wooden oars resting beneath the seats and slowly pushed them into the black water. The boat drifted away from shore almost silently. Fog swallowed them within seconds. Nathan rowed carefully while rainwater gathered along the sleeves of his jacket and dripped from his fingertips. Valor remained standing at the front of the boat, watching the shoreline disappear behind layers of mist. Somewhere back near the cabin, faint voices echoed through the storm before fading completely into distance. Miller Lake stretched nearly 6 miles through the mountains, surrounded by dense forest and abandoned logging roads forgotten decades earlier. Nathan remembered fishing there as a boy with his father before deployments, funerals, and loss turned memories into ghosts. The lake had always felt endless at night. Tonight it felt haunted. Nathan rested the oars briefly while the boat drifted deeper into fog. He opened the duffel bag again beneath the cover of his jacket and examined the flash drive more carefully. Sheriff Department evidence label. Handwritten date from 9 years earlier. Before Aaron disappeared. Beneath the label, Aaron had scratched one word into the plastic with a knife blade. Ledger. Nathan frowned. Financial records. Payments. Routes. Names. Enough to destroy powerful people if the information survived. Valor suddenly lowered his head toward the floor of the boat and nudged something hidden beneath one of the benches. Nathan lifted the loose wooden panel carefully. Underneath rested another small package wrapped tightly in oilcloth. He stared at it in surprise. Aaron had prepared the boat too. Layer after layer of backup plans hidden across the lake like breadcrumbs left for someone loyal enough to keep searching. Nathan slowly unwrapped the bundle. Inside rested a faded photograph and a small silver cross hanging from a chain. The photograph showed Aaron Hayes sitting beside Valor years earlier on this very same lake dock during summer. Aaron smiled into the camera while Valor leaned against his leg, young and strong, and completely certain the world was safe because his partner was beside him. Nathan studied the image quietly while rain tapped softly against the boat. Then he turned the photograph over. On the back, Aaron had written a single sentence in black ink. "If Valor trusts you, finish what I could not." Nathan swallowed hard. The weight of those words settled deeply into his chest. Not because Aaron expected revenge, because Aaron had trusted someone would eventually choose truth over fear. Valor rested his chin gently against Nathan's knee while the lake drifted silently beneath them. The shepherd looked exhausted now, older than before. Nathan reached down and brushed rainwater carefully from the dog's face. "You did enough, partner," he whispered softly. Valor's eyes closed for only a second beneath Nathan's hand. Then suddenly bright headlights burst through the fog somewhere across the water. Nathan froze instantly. Another boat engine roared faintly in the distance, growing louder by the second. Sheriff Dunley's people were searching the lake. The searchlights cut through the fog in long white beams while the distant engine echoed across Miller Lake like thunder trapped beneath the mountains. Nathan tightened his grip on the oars and guided the patrol boat deeper into the mist, careful not to splash louder than necessary. Valor stood rigid at the bow, soaked fur pressed flat against his frame, ears locked toward the approaching sound. The German shepherd did not look afraid. He looked prepared. Nathan had seen that same expression on Marines before dangerous missions overseas. Quiet acceptance. The understanding that loyalty sometimes demanded courage without guarantees. Rain drifted across the lake in cold sheets while fog wrapped around the small aluminum boat, so thick Nathan could barely see 10 feet ahead. Somewhere beyond the white haze, another engine idled closer. Slow. Searching. Nathan stopped rowing and listened carefully. Voices carried faintly through the darkness. Sheriff deputies. At least 2 men. Maybe more. He reached into the duffel bag again and pulled out the old sheriff department file Aaron had hidden with the recorder. Water damage stained the edges, but several pages remained readable beneath the flashlight tucked carefully under Nathan's jacket. Transaction records. Property deeds. License plate numbers. Then one name stopped him cold. Emily Carter. Nathan's chest tightened instantly. Emily Carter had disappeared from Ashton Ridge 9 years earlier at 17 years old. The town called it a runaway case. Nathan remembered the candlelight vigils outside the church and the photographs her mother taped to grocery store windows begging for information. According to Aaron's notes, Emily never ran away. Aaron believed she had been taken through the logging routes near Miller Lake by people connected to Dunley's network. Nathan slowly closed his eyes for one painful second. Suddenly, this was no longer just about corruption or hidden evidence. Families had spent years mourning children who were never truly searched for. Valor shifted beside him and released a soft whine while resting one paw against Nathan's leg. Nathan looked down toward the shepherd's tired amber eyes. Aaron knew, he whispered quietly. That is why they silenced him. The lake wind carried the scent of gasoline closer now. Nathan extinguished the flashlight instantly. Through the fog ahead, faint outlines of another boat slowly emerged, larger than theirs. Sheriff department markings barely visible beneath rainwater. Search beams swept across the lake's surface only yards away now. Nathan lowered himself deeper into the patrol boat while Valor crouched silently beside him. The shepherd's breathing remained calm despite the tension surrounding them. Nathan placed one steady hand against the dog's shoulder. "Stay," he whispered softly. The other boat drifted dangerously close through the fog. Nathan could now hear pieces of conversation between the deputies. Dunley wants the veteran found before daylight. What about the dog? A pause followed. Then another voice answered quietly. Sheriff said the animal has been a problem for years. Nathan felt anger rise slowly in his chest, hot and heavy. Not reckless anger. The kind born from witnessing too much cruelty disguised as authority. Valor had spent 8 years protecting evidence because human beings failed to protect each other. The thought hollowed Nathan more deeply than the cold rain ever could. Suddenly Valor's head lifted sharply toward the eastern shoreline, barely visible through the fog. Nathan followed the dog's stare and noticed something faint in the distance. A A single light glowing near the far side of the lake. Steady, not moving. A cabin, perhaps. Or a marina. Valor nudged Nathan's arm twice before looking toward the light again. Recognition. Nathan understood immediately. Aaron must have used another safe location across the lake. Somewhere hidden. Somewhere only Valor remembered. The sheriff boat drifted past within 30 yards without noticing them, swallowed again by fog and darkness. Nathan waited until the engine noise faded before slowly lifting the oars once more. Valor remained fixed on the distant light ahead while rain whispered softly across the black water. Then Nathan saw it too. Hanging near the shoreline cabin through the mist was an old Marine Corps flag moving gently in the wind. The Marine Corps flag moved slowly in the rain above the distant shoreline cabin while fog drifted across Miller Lake in long pale waves. Nathan rowed carefully toward the light, every stroke quiet against the black water. Behind them, the sheriff department boat faded deeper into the storm, its search beams dissolving into mist. Valor remained standing at the bow despite exhaustion pulling visibly at his aging body. His amber eyes never left the cabin ahead. Nathan could feel it now too. Not safety exactly, but purpose. The kind that arrives after wandering too long through grief without direction. The shoreline emerged slowly through the fog. A narrow wooden dock stretched into the lake beside a weathered cabin built from dark cedar logs. Warm yellow light glowed behind the front window, soft against the storm surrounding it. Nathan guided the patrol boat alongside the dock and climbed out first, boots splashing into shallow water near the shore. Valor followed carefully, slower now than before. The shepherd stumbled once on the slick boards before regaining balance. Nathan immediately crouched beside him. Easy, partner. Valor pressed briefly against Nathan's side, breathing heavier than earlier. The years were finally showing. Nathan wrapped one arm beneath the dog's chest for support as they crossed toward the cabin through steady rain. The smell of wood smoke drifted through the cold night air. Someone was home. Before Nathan reached the porch, the cabin door opened quietly. An older woman stepped into the warm light, holding a lantern near her chest. Silver hair pulled back neatly. Thick wool sweater beneath a canvas coat. Her eyes moved first toward Nathan, then instantly toward Valor. The lantern trembled slightly in her hand. "Oh my God," she whispered. Valor stopped moving the moment he saw her. For the first time since Nathan met him, the shepherd's rigid posture softened completely. His tail moved once. Slowly, carefully. The woman descended the porch steps into the rain without hesitation and knelt before the dog despite the mud soaking her clothes. Tears filled her eyes almost immediately. "Valor," she breathed. The German shepherd lowered his head gently into her arms. Nathan looked away for a second, throat tightening unexpectedly. Some reunions arrived loudly with cheers and celebration. Others arrived quietly after years of surviving loneliness one day at a time. The woman held Valor's face carefully between trembling hands while rainwater mixed with tears along her cheeks. "You stubborn old soul," she whispered softly. "You kept searching." Nathan stepped onto the porch beside them while warm light spilled across the wet boards. "You know him?" he asked quietly. The woman nodded slowly without taking her eyes off the dog. "My name is Eleanor Hayes," she said. "Aaron was my younger brother." Silence settled around the porch except for rain tapping softly against the roof overhead. Nathan felt cold realization move through him again. Aaron had hidden another safe place across the lake with family he trusted. Eleanor rose slowly and looked toward the duffel bag beneath Nathan's jacket. Her expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Recognition. "He found the evidence," she whispered. Nathan nodded once. "And the sheriff knows somebody has it." Eleanor stepped aside immediately and opened the cabin door wider. "Then get inside before daylight comes." Warmth wrapped around Nathan the moment they entered. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke, black coffee, and old books. Framed photographs lined the walls beside military medals, and fishing lures faded by time. One photograph near the fireplace showed Aaron standing beside Eleanor years earlier, while young Valor sat proudly between them, wearing a sheriff department K9 vest. Nathan slowly removed the soaked duffel bag and placed it onto the wooden table. Eleanor stared at it silently for several seconds before touching the old cassette recorder with trembling fingers. "Aaron called me the night he disappeared," she said softly. "He told me if Valor ever came back with someone he trusted, It meant the truth was finally ready to come home. Valor lowered himself heavily beside the fireplace at last, exhausted beyond hiding it now. Nathan crouched beside the old shepherd and rested one hand gently against his damp fur while thunder rolled softly across the mountains outside. Then Eleanor looked toward Nathan with tears still shining in her eyes, and quietly said the words Aaron never lived long enough to hear. "Thank you for not leaving him alone." Morning arrived slowly over Miller Lake, pale silver light spilling across the water while fog drifted low between the pine trees like the last remnants of a long nightmare, finally releasing its grip. Rain had stopped sometime before dawn. The silence afterward felt sacred. Nathan stood near the cabin window holding a mug of untouched coffee while Eleanor Hayes carefully sorted through Aaron's evidence at the wooden table behind him. Financial ledgers, vehicle records, photographs, names connected to years of disappearances buried beneath lies and forgotten headlines. The small cabin smelled of cedar smoke and fresh coffee now instead of storm and fear. For the first time in years, the truth no longer belonged to the dark. Valor slept heavily beside the fireplace wrapped in an old wool blanket Eleanor had laid over him during the night. The German shepherd's breathing came slow and uneven with exhaustion, paws twitching occasionally as though chasing old memories through dreams. Nathan glanced toward the dog quietly. It struck him then how strange grace could look sometimes. Not miracles falling from heaven, just one loyal soul refusing to give up until another broken soul finally listened. Eleanor slid the flash drive carefully across the table toward Nathan. "Rebecca Torres called an hour ago," she said softly. "Federal investigators are already on their way from Denver." Nathan nodded once. He had spoken briefly with Rebecca before sunrise using the old landline hidden inside Eleanor's cabin. He trusted her because she still sounded angry about injustice in a world where too many people became numb to it. She had not wasted time asking questions. The moment Nathan mentioned Aaron Hayes and Miller Lake, her voice changed. Focused, sharp, alive. Outside the cabin window, sunlight slowly broke through the clouds over the lake for the first time in days. Nathan watched gold light spread across the water while distant birds moved above the shoreline pines. Ashton Ridge would wake soon. By nightfall, everything inside that quiet mountain town would begin changing. Sheriff Dunley's name would no longer sit untouched above charity dinners and campaign signs. Families who spent years mourning missing daughters would finally learn somebody had fought for them until the very end. Aaron Hayes would stop being a ghost story whispered through grocery store aisles and become what he always was, a good man abandoned by corrupt people too afraid of the truth. Eleanor rose slowly from the table and carried something toward the fireplace. An old sheriff department K9 vest carefully preserved inside clear plastic for years. Valor opened his tired eyes the moment Eleanor knelt beside him. His ears twitched weakly as she gently slipped the vest across his shoulders once more. The fabric barely fit his older frame now, but the faded department patch remained visible beneath the firelight. Valor lifted his head slowly while Eleanor brushed trembling fingers across the top of his neck. Tears filled her eyes again, though this time they carried relief instead of grief. "Your partner is coming home," she whispered. Nathan felt his throat tighten unexpectedly as the old shepherd rested his head quietly against Eleanor's lap. No barking, no dramatic moment, just peace finally reaching a soul that had wandered through loss for too long. Then Nathan noticed something resting beneath Valor's paw near the blanket. Aaron's silver badge, the same one the dog carried every night to the abandoned station for 41 days. Nathan crouched beside him carefully and picked it up. The scratched metal felt cold against his palm despite the warmth of the fire. Valor watched him silently. Nathan stared at the badge for several seconds before clipping it gently onto the old K9 vest where it belonged. The German shepherd closed his eyes slowly afterward and released a long, exhausted breath beside the fire. Outside, morning sunlight spread wider across Miller Lake while pine trees swayed softly in the clean mountain wind. And for the first time in 8 years, Valor finally stopped waiting. 3 weeks later, sunlight covered Ashton Ridge with the kind of quiet warmth that only arrives after a hard winter finally loosens its grip. Snow still clung to the higher mountain ridges beyond Miller Lake, but the town itself had begun breathing again. Storefront windows reopened. Children rode bicycles through the streets after school. People who once lowered their voices whenever Aaron Hayes was mentioned now spoke his name openly beneath clear blue skies. Federal investigators had spent days combing through the sheriff department records hidden by Aaron for nearly a decade. Sheriff Marcus Dunley resigned before charges were publicly announced. Councilman Richard Vance disappeared from town before sunrise 2 mornings later. Families who spent years carrying unanswered grief finally received phone calls that began with the words, "We found evidence." Nathan stood quietly beneath the pine trees outside Ashton Ridge Memorial Park while cold spring wind moved softly through the branches overhead. The cemetery overlooked Miller Lake from the northern hill, sunlight glittering across the water below like shattered glass. A small crowd gathered around the new memorial stone placed beside Aaron Hayes' grave earlier that morning. Deputies in formal dress uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder near veterans wearing old Marine Corps jackets faded by time. No speeches lasted very long. Some truths felt too heavy for too many words. Eleanor Hayes rested one hand against the polished stone while tears moved silently down her cheeks. Engraved beneath Aaron's name were simple words chosen by his sister herself. He stayed loyal when others walked away. Nathan looked toward Valor lying quietly beside the grave beneath the shade of a cedar tree. The old German shepherd wore Aaron's restored K9 vest one final time. The silver badge rested against his chest, catching sunlight whenever the wind shifted through the branches overhead. Children from town approached slowly throughout the afternoon to leave tennis balls, dog biscuits, and handwritten notes beside him. Valor accepted each offering calmly without rising from the grass. Exhaustion had settled deep into his aging body now, but there was peace in his eyes Nathan had never seen before. The waiting was over. Rebecca Torres arrived near noon carrying a camera she never once lifted from her shoulder. Instead, she stood beside Nathan overlooking the lake while church bells echoed softly through town below. "You know this story is going national," she said quietly. Nathan shook his head once. It was never about headlines. Rebecca glanced toward Valor resting near Aaron's grave. "No," she admitted softly. "It was about a dog who remembered what people tried to bury." Silence settled comfortably between them afterward while wind carried the scent of pine needles and fresh earth across the hillside. Nathan watched sunlight move across the lake and realized something inside himself had changed too. For years after Claire died, he moved through life like a man surviving out of habit rather than purpose. But somewhere between the abandoned station, the storm-covered lake, and one loyal shepherd refusing to surrender his partner's memory, Nathan found something he thought the war had taken forever. Not happiness, something quieter, grace. As evening approached, most of the crowd slowly disappeared down the hill toward town. Eleanor kissed Valor gently on the head before leaving flowers beside her brother's grave. Soon only Nathan and the old shepherd remained beneath the cedar trees, while sunset painted Miller Lake gold beneath the mountains. Nathan sat beside Valor in the cool grass and rested one hand against the dog's neck. Valor leaned softly into him with tired familiarity. No commands, no fear, just trust, the kind built through shared silence and surviving sorrow together. Far below them, church bells rang once more through Ashton Ridge while evening wind moved gently across the water. Nathan looked toward the horizon glowing beneath the fading light and quietly whispered the words, "Aaron Hayes never lived long enough to hear himself. You did not disappear, brother." Valor closed his eyes beside him as the last sunlight settled across the lake. And somewhere deep within the peaceful silence of those mountains, two loyal souls finally found their way home.